Ni hao, everybody, and welcome to our first day of our study of China. If you've heard me talk about China before, it's because I think that it has one of the premier places in talking about ancient civilizations that are connected to modern times. And even in the last 6 weeks, you have heard so much about China, probably negative information, but it's important to consider their ancestral history as well as their contemporary situation as we live in a global world. Modern China, and you see the flag of modern China up in the left-hand corner of this slide, is the third largest country in the world after Russia and Canada. It covers about 3.7 million square miles. And as of 2019, there are 1.4 billion people in China. So the largest populated country in the world right now, which will probably soon be overtaken by India, but give or take a few 100,000 people, it is largely populated. Sometimes I need a reference point to be able to outline a country in my mind, what it looks like on the map. And to me, India is always best represented by a rooster. Do you see the correlation there? Seems like it's important to understand the sheer size of China. So this is an overlay of China over the United States. You'll notice that it extends in large part across the right-hand side up into Canada. And then also notice on the right-hand side of your screen, the little island that's right down about 3/4 of the way down on your screen. And it says Taipei. That's the capital of Taiwan, which is currently a part of mainland China, although it does not want to be considered that way, and we'll talk about that later. I also want to talk about one area we're not going to go into very much, but I just want to mention this area called the Turfan Depression is actually 500 feet below sea level. It includes the second lowest place in China. It can grow hot, and so hot that the raindrops evaporate before reaching the ground. So almost like a desert, but not exactly. And now we're going to move on to really talking about what should I know by the end of this video and lessons to be able to take the assessment. Understand why geographical features were able to keep things in and out of China. Identify geographical features of China, including the Himalayas, Tibetan Kang Plateau, Gobi Desert, Taklamakan Desert, North China Plain, Yellow or Honghe River, the Changjiang River or the Yangtze River, North China Plain, and the Changjiang Basin. If you know anybody who works in real estate, there's a saying that says location, location, location is everything. And for China, this was a really big deterrent to trading with other countries and keeping ideas in and taking ideas from other places. If you look, it was a huge difference to go to any of the other major trading hubs in the world. So if you were to go to the Middle East, it was quite a ways. If you were to go to India, and if you were to go to Rome, all the way over here, it was a huge endeavor and very difficult to do. So one of the things we're going to talk about are natural barriers. Natural barriers that allowed for China to remain isolated for much of its history. And there are 4 items: mountains, plateaus, deserts, seas, and oceans. First, we're going to talk about the Himalayan mountains, and you've heard about those before when we talked about India. The Himalayan mountains are the home to what large mountain? And if you're saying Mount Everest, you are correct. It is actually not in China, but you'll notice that it creates a natural border, rising some 5 miles high from its base to the top. So it was very difficult for people to get across Mount Everest and the rest of the Himalayas, either to get into China or to get out of China. So the Himalayan mountains is one natural barrier. The second barrier we're going to talk about is the Tibet-Qinghai Plateau. It's in the southwestern part of outer China and dominated by the high Tibetan Qinghai Plateau, also known as the Tibetan Plateau. This area is often called the roof of the world. Its average elevation is more than 2 miles above sea level. It's a very large area covering almost a quarter of the land in China. The Tibetan Plateau is rocky land surrounded by towering mountains. The Himalayas are on the edge of the southern edge of the plateau and the tallest mountain in the world. Yes, you guessed it, Mount Everest is part of this mountain range. Its peak is more than 5 miles high. Since the Tibetan Plateau is so high, the climate is very hot. The air is thin and dry, and snow falls even in the summer. Two of Chinese major rivers begin in this area, the Henghe or Yellow River and the Changjiang or the Yangtze River. In spite of the rivers, the plateau is very dry. The natural vegetation consists of sparse scrub and grasses. For the people of ancient times, this would have been a very challenging place to live. It was too cold and dry to grow crops, but the grasses would have provided some food for yak and other livestock. The cold rocky plateau and the high mountains made travel through this area to inner China very difficult. The Northwest Deserts, which are part of outer China, and it's known for its great deserts, which include the Taklamakan and the Gobi Desert. The deserts are harsh places to live and difficult for travelers to cross. The climate varies from sizzling hot in the summer to below freezing in winter. The only places to grow crops or raise animals, such as sheep, are in the oases, which are small pockets where water can be found. In ancient times, shelters made of mud were sometimes built near oases, which is a great way to track where they were. We're going to talk about two of these deserts in specific, and that's the Taklamakan Desert, which is about 105 square miles. It's considered one of the most dangerous deserts in the world. In fact, its name means once you go in, you will not come out. The desert's huge sand dunes shift and change in the wind, blowing as the wind blows the sand around. Sandstorms arise with sudden speed. Legend says that 2 armies and 300 cities are buried 600 feet beneath the sand dunes. As you might expect, the desert is too dry to have much vegetation. Bushes, weeds, and trees grow only near oases and along rivers. The Gobi Desert. You'll notice in contrast to the Taklamakan, it is very different, where the Taklamakan Desert had a lot of sand dunes. The Gobi Desert has very little. The Gobi Desert is one of the world's largest deserts, stretching over 500,000 square miles. It covers part of China and present-day Mongolia. Unlike the Taklamakan Desert, the Gobi has very few sand dunes. Most of the desert is stony. Its surface is made up of small petals and tiny bits of sand. Vegetation is sparse, and plants tend to be small and widely spaced. When we talk about barriers to get into a country, I want to just mention the last one, which may seem obvious to all of us, and that's seas and oceans. You will notice that along here there are 3 seas evident, and one is the Yellow Sea, the South China Sea, and the Pacific Ocean. All of these created natural barriers to people getting into China, and in modern times, and actually even into the 1700s and 1800s, it was very helpful to have this waterway as a means to travel to the rest of the world. Now we're going to get to the last area of settlement on the outer range, and that's the Northeastern Plain. The Northeastern Plain is located east of present-day Mongolia. Today this area is sometimes called Inner Mongolia and sometimes Manchuria. I bet some of you have heard about that. It is a land of low hills and plains. The natural vegetation is mostly prairie grass, and in ancient times, the grass provided food for horses, sheep, and other animals raised by herders. The major rivers running through the Northeastern Plain are the Lao and Sungari. The Lao is a shallow river. Only small boats can navigate it. The Sungari is deep, and it can carry large boats. The river, however, does freeze in the winter, and people use them as roads. Can you imagine that? The Northeastern Plain is an area of contrast. In short, it has warm summers, and the northern and eastern parts of the plain are dry and cold in winters. The southern half, especially the Valley of Lao, has mild weather and more water. In general, though, the plain is too cold and dry to be a good place for growing crops. In the south, a narrow coastal plain links this area to the rest of China. This plain was the route several groups of invaders took into interior China. Before we move into the inner area of China, I want to highlight two rivers. One is the Honghe River, which is also called the Yellow River, and the Changjiang River, which is also called the Yangtze River. While there are other rivers in China, these are the two major rivers. The Honghe River floods a lot, so it's pretty problematic. The Changjiang River is considered the longest river in China and provides much of the water supplies for the entire country. So this is a map of the China agricultural regions. These are the regions of agricultural development in modern day. Hasn't changed much from ancient times, and it actually reflects one of the first places that we have found any settling in China. So you can clearly see that part of the country has lots of opportunity for food, and the other part has a real food shortage. In modern China, this is a really big problem that has caused the Chinese government to think about ways they can transport food to eastern China. And again, we'll talk about that more when we get to current events. So right now we're going to talk about the North China Plain. The North China Plain is a flat region of grasslands in inner China. The climate in this region is fairly mild. It's warmer than the areas to the north and cooler than the areas to the south. This region is sometimes called the land of yellow earth because the ground is covered by yellow limestone silt called loess. The loess comes from the Gobi Desert. It's carried by the wind to the North China Plain. The river that runs through the plain is also full of yellow loess. The loess gives the river its name, Honghe, or Yellow River. The Honghe is one of the longest rivers in the world. It may be the world's muddiest river. The mud makes it look more like soup than river water. The river starts in the high western mountains and winds its way down to the eastern plains. The silt, or loess, it carries helps fertilize the surrounding lands, making the North China Plain a good place to settle down and grow crops. While the Honghe helps farmers, it has also been the source of many disasters, making it also said the River of Sorrows. In the past 3,000 years, the river is said to have flooded more than 1,500 times, causing damage to cities and much loss of life. The Middle and Lower Changjiang Basins. The Middle and Lower Changjiang Basins are areas of low, wet, coastal plains. The basins are located along the river called the Changjiang. The Changjiang is even longer than the Honghe. In fact, its name means long river and has hundreds of tributaries. People use the river to move goods between eastern and western areas of the region. Like the Honghe, the Changjiang starts in the high western mountains. It flows through 3 plains and then to a rich delta. Its deposits make the surrounding lands very fertile. The river floods less than the Honghe, which makes it less dangerous. The climate in the Changjiang basins is warm and wet, and in ancient times the vegetation may have been a thick rainforest. There was limited space for farming, and the area was not suitable for grazing animals. But the basins were very good for growing rice, which needed lots of warmth and moisture. Of course, that's changed over time as farmers have cut down the dense forestry, and now it's an area very full of rice opportunities. Interestingly enough, though, I have to say, and I'll go over this again when we get to current events, I was in China for a month, and I would say that I assumed I'd be eating rice almost every day, and I very rarely ate rice, which was pretty interesting. Anyway, let's move on with geography. This is an aerial view of China, and even today you can tell where people live in China and where they do not, which to me is interesting because the geographical barriers in China haven't gone away, and most people still live in the western part of China, and the outer part of China remains unsettled. So you have in this video gone over the 4 different barriers to travel in China. You've gone over the agricultural areas that make China able to be populated. And we're going to move on in the next video to the first civilization in China.